Athletes have become more individualized than ever. We have seen players hold out until free agency, demand trades, and truly begin to take charge in where they want the rest of their respective careers to go. Part of this is due to the increasing importance and influence that free agency has. Just one offseason can shake any sport's lead to its core with some of the moves that are made. Not to mention, it gives us all something to talk about during the offseason. However, things were not always like this. It wasn't that long ago that in most leagues, the team you were drafted by was the team you were stuck with until the owner decided they didn't want you anymore. It placed athletes in a situation where their contracts could be manipulated and they didn't have any control. This was until one man sacrificed his career and changed the sports industry forever.
Curt Flood was an outfielder who played most of his career with the St. Louis Cardinals. He was originally signed by the Reds in 1956, but was traded to the Cardinals just 1 year later. In St. Louis, Flood became a star. His defensive ability was tough to match, and his offense continued to improve. Flood became an All-Star for the first time in 1964. The same year, the Cardinals went on to win the World Series. Flood and the Cards went on to win another championship in 1967 and added a World Series appearance in 1968. After the 1968 season, Flood was a little upset. He was coming off one of his best seasons and was only offered a $5,000 raise. That raise was well below the $90,000 Flood believed he was worth, but he didn't really have a choice and returned to the Cardinals. At the time, Major League Baseball had one of the worst systems for players out of all the major sports leagues, and this was due to something known as the Reserve Clause. The Reserve Clause in baseball contracts essentially bound players to their teams indefinitely, meaning players could be traded or assigned to any team at the owner's direction without the player's consent.
While Curt Flood's case will forever show as a loss in court, the impact it had on the sports world was a victory much larger than ever expected. In the years to follow, there were drastic changes on the free agency process. Just 3 years later, baseball arbitrator Pete Seitz made a ruling stated that MLB players would become free agents if they played 1 year with their team without a contract. This ruling was essentially the end of the reserve clause, and MLB's 6-year free agency system we know today was put into place 1 year later. The NFL and NBA saw major rule changes in the years to follow as well. In 1976, the NFLPA won a court case to eliminate the Rozelle rule, and in 1987, the players went on strike pushing for free agency, which they were then granted in 1993. The NBA reached a new CBA in 1988, which finally allowed players to choose what team they wanted to go to after filling out their service time. And since then, things have really begun to take off for players.
Curt Flood was such a big influence in professional sports leagues itself, not just Major League Baseball. Professional baseball was one of the first sports to have free agency. Then it carried on to the National Football League. Not too long after, the National Basketball Association followed. In 1979, Major League pitcher Nolan Ryan became the first baseball player to sign a contract worth $1 million per season. Less than 20 years later, that was the average salary for an MLB player. Pro baseball players today are getting paid at least double what they would have 20 years ago as the league grows in viewership and revenue. From Babe Ruth to Mike Trout, free agency has played a crucial role in shaping the landscape of America's pastime. The history of MLB free agency begins in the late 1970s. Before then, players were tied to their teams for the entirety of their career with little freedom to negotiate their contracts or test the market system. Free agency was created in 1975 after a monumental ruling known as the Seitz decision. Independent arbitrator Peter Seitz ruled that pitchers Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally should become free agents after playing a full season without signing contracts. MLB owners panicked after hearing this, as they were worried players would become free agents after every season, creating mayhem within the league. Because of that, owners created a compromise on how the system works. Starting the very day after the end of the World Series, the free agency period is one of the most exciting times of the year for fans and teams alike. It's an opportunity for teams to rebuild, reload, or simply add a key piece to their roster to make a playoff run the following year. It's also a time where players can cash in on their hard work and secure a contract that will set them up for life.
There are different types of free agents. A player becomes a free agent upon reaching 6 years of Major League service time, or when they are released from their organization prior to reaching 6 years of service time. That player is then eligible to negotiate with different franchises in search of their next contract. Some players elect to sign an extension with their team before they reach this period, or bet on themselves and take a chance in the open market. One of the most important factors for teams in free agency is how the player will fit with their current roster and how they will help the team win games. Teams will often sign a player to a large contract, but if they don't fit well with the team or don't perform up to expectations, the contract can become a burden. Another factor to consider is the player's age. While older players may bring a wealth of experience and leadership, they may also be closer to the end of their career and may not provide as much as value as a younger player. A negotiation process for free agents can be a long and complicated one. Teams will often make initial offers to players, and then the player and their agent will consider these offers and potentially counter with their own. Teams are trying to put together the best roster possible in order to win and bring in revenue, while players are trying to secure the most money possible for their services. It's a negotiation, and both sides are trying to get the best deal possible. While the money involved in free agency can be staggering, but at the end of the day, it's just business. Every year, MLB free agents are signing for larger and larger contracts. In 2022, Yankees outfielder Aaron Judge signed the largest ever free agent deal worth $360 million over 9 years. This makes him one of the highest paid athletes in the world, getting paid more than the likes of Luka Doncic, Russell Wilson, and Max Verstappen. Judge broke out in 2017 after a stellar rookie campaign, and most recently broke the American League home run record, clobbering 62 of them in one season. Judge is a solidified superstar and looks to be crushing baseballs and pinstripes for years to come. Spending all this money on players not only has a huge impact on their franchise, but on the league as a whole. The movement of top players from team to team can change the balance of power and create new dynasties. It can also lead to increased unity, making a more competitive league. In 1970, Flood was traded from the Cardinals to the Philadelphia Phillies and refused to accept the trade, challenging the reserve clause in court. Flood argued that it violated his constitutional rights, particularly the 13th Amendment, which outlaws involuntary servitude.
This topic is a right and responsibility by players having freedom in their career and what team to play for in the sport they love. They have the liberty to negotiate a contract to make as much money as possible. This isn't even just for sports, it could be in any career. The reverse of the reserve clause created free labor in marketing. As shown in the video previously, Aaron Judge signed one of the biggest contracts in baseball history in 2022. Other players have signed massive contracts to other teams in all sports, as well as Juan Soto signing to the Mets this past offseason. He signed the biggest contract in sports history with $765 million throughout 15 years.